Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we're just waiting for a couple people, so we'll wait out the clock here just a few more minutes and then get started. How's your guys' days going so far?
Pretty decent.
Hi, Riley.
Hi, Rachel.
I'm working from home today, this whole week, and I'm not used to it. I have very different setup, don't have access to all my files and everything, and I thought I had deleted our slideshow right before I started the Zoom meeting, and I was panicking. So I think it's all only uphill from here. I guess I'm not sure if we're waiting for John or Michael. Do you guys know who, is it 4952405?
I do not know the number.
Must be one of them. We'll give them a couple more minutes here. Yes. I'm gonna give Michael a call really quick and just make sure he has this on his radar. Give me 2 minutes. Hey, Michael, I was just about to call you. How's it going?
Hey, Kara. I'm not hearing you for some reason. Oh, there you go. Gotcha.
Perfect. I think I had myself
Yeah.
muted there for a second. So I think we have everybody. I'm going to go ahead and
Okay.
assume that the phone number is John, and maybe I'll defer to you, Michael, if you want to, if you have anything to say to kind of start the meeting out, and then
Yep.
we can kind of jump into the what I have for
You
you
got the
guys.
agenda. Yep. Very good. All righty. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I believe everyone has the meeting materials. There was a agenda sent out along with just a little blurb on public open meeting laws in Montana. And then we will be working through documents that were sent out for the original January 18th meeting. So the program guidelines and application today. So our focus of today's meeting will be on those program guidelines and application. Kara will be collecting feedback and also suggested edits to the documents today. Okay, Kara, you want to get us started?
I do, and I'm just gonna ask for your guys' patience a little bit. I'm working with my home computer, and I don't have as much screen space to play with, so I may not be kind of toggling between documents as much as I was hoping to. But I think I certainly have everything up. I can pull things up if that ends up being the best way to do it. But I'll go ahead and share my screen and go from there. Can you guys see this little presenter view box I'm moving around too? Oh, you can? Okay. Oh, you can't? Okay, I was hoping that was the case because I'm gonna put that right over the presentation. So just starting out here, let me get the, so initially when I made this presentation, I really wanted to go through the program guidelines really section by section and just kind of ask you guys a few pointed questions and see what kind of feedback you had, and then really just kind of comb through there and get some very specific edits from you guys. And I think just given our time constraints, you'll kind of see as we go through here, I started doing that. So there are a few slides we're just going to kind of go through pretty quickly. And then towards the end of the guidelines anyway, we're kind of just going to hit some of the main concepts there and see if that kind of just jogs kind of some conversation. And so really the purpose of this is just to get some feedback from you guys. And this really is kind of our last step to finalize all of this. We have had these documents, at least in draft form, available since over the summer, like maybe midway through the summer. And we went through kind of the same feedback process with some of our area housing stakeholders. We took that into consideration. We made a lot of those edits. And then, so what you're seeing is actually a document that's kind of already gone through several iterations and had a lot of eyes on it already. And so, there will be obviously some grammatical errors and things like that. And we'd love to also have your feedback on those. But our goal, our hope is that by our next meeting, which I think is March 2nd, that we'll really feel comfortable putting this to a vote and finalizing these documents so that we can really start thinking about a funding or application timeline and what that could look like. We'll jump into the guidelines here. And so this was kind of my bullet points here as far as what our introduction of this document contains. So I'll run through these. So really this fund is intended as gap financing, and it says last resort here. And you'll kind of see as we go through here, and as you've probably read already, that given the match requirements, we really are providing this money as a maybe not a small portion of the total project cost, but it's certainly not the main source of money for any project that will be that it'll be a part of. And it cannot be used when other funding is available. So if it's just evident that other programs were not applied to or not taken advantage of, then that will certainly be taken into account when we're going through and making our recommendations. And also, kind of as we created these documents initially, we really didn't want to be duplicating any compliance requirements. And so if someone is already taking advantage of the home program or some kind of block grant, something like that, tax credits, they're not going to be asked to do much reporting outside of what they're required to for that. So we really want this to be a streamlined addition of funding for an applicant. We don't want to saddle them with a lot of administrative requirements to utilize this money. The idea also is that this is a revolving loan fund. So you'll see as we go through here, there are options for at least partial grants, but we do want some of this money to be returning and to be available in the future for similar programming. We don't just want it to go all out the door and then have nothing in 2023 to put out to the public. And then you'll see too, this relies heavily on covenants to secure long-term affordability. And so that's certainly one of the goals of the city, is to support and create as much long-term affordable housing as possible. And so I just want to give you guys a minute here if you feel that this that the introduction to our guidelines is sufficient, if you think that there are items that could be added for clarity or to give an applicant a better idea of what they're getting into. I'll just go ahead and open up the floor. And if you guys have anything, just or even just thoughts, questions, anything like that, just go ahead and jump in there.
And folks, do people have a question or a comment?
Kara, this is Chris.
Hey, Chris.
What kind of covenants could you put in place that would maintain this as affordable housing long term?
Sure. So I think we'll have a little bit more detail later on, and I'm not sure, you were kind of maybe cut out a little bit at the beginning there, but we'll rely on like deed restrictions, and I think some projects may be using like converting land to a land trust, and so that'll have a covenant attached to it. I'm not sure if that's the right word, actually. It'll have a deed restriction, at least, with that will maintain affordability for either a certain amount of time, or in the case of a land trust, I think in perpetuity.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of the existing programs will have those already in place as part of their funding. So that will provide a meaningful guarantee that it will remain in affordable housing, but that will vary to the type of housing, affordable housing. That will be, some of it will be a deed restriction on, on a single family home, things like that would be in place. Kara, my question would be to provide additional more guidance as to types of what is meant by affordable housing, and including rental housing and affordable home ownership. And do you also view this as a source of funding for other types of, is it to be used for congregate settings, or is it supposed to be permanent affordable housing?
Sure, and I think, it's broken up I guess, a little bit more within the document. So you think there should be more detail about exactly what kind of housing it would fund here in the introduction?
And maybe just that could be addressed with just some background information. I just noticed Missoula had a little bit more about why. So maybe those two things could be solved at once.
So just give a little bit more context, and maybe like some history on like how the fund came to be. Is that
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
okay? Perfect. And I'm writing some notes, and then this is also recorded, so we'll be able to make some minutes from that recording afterwards.
See, the main document gives us.
Okay. And so my goal too after this, I'm gonna kind of summarize your guys' comments and send those out just to make sure that I got everything down right. And then we're going to be working with with Andrew to get both of these documents updated, hopefully at least a week before our next meeting, so that you have some time to review them before having to vote on them. But I'll certainly try to get those edits out as soon as possible.
Yeah, I
One more
don't,
comment
I
on the
think
introduction.
I think it
Go
might
ahead.
benefit from having a little more clarity as to the type of housing, affordable housing that the funds to address. So in the guidelines, it says rehabilitation, construction, demolition, reconstruction, conversion, or rehabilitation of affordable rental or non-permanent housing, and development of affordable single-family housing. But in these uses, you would consider assisting in the purchase of affordable home ownership, and you would, and are we talking, so we're talking rental housing, but we're not talking like an emergency shelter or a group home here.
No, it could. So if you go, we can get into this more too in a little bit, but if you go down to it'd be section 6, rental and non-permanent housing.
Okay.
So yeah, it
Oh,
is
that's
very,
where
it is,
it's
yeah, it is
detailed.
kind of vague
Okay.
in that initially, but it does say projects may include, but are not necessarily limited to affordable housing, such as multifamily rental development, housing for seniors, accessory dwelling units, supportive housing, and temporary housing such as shelters.
And temporary house such as shelters. Okay, that's where that's covered. Okay.
But yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I think maybe that would be helpful just up front, so you don't have to go digging through the entire document to find that example.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I
just
think
something that says the goal.
That use of the term non-permanent housing is, I don't know, what does that mean to you, non-permanent housing?
And initially when Andrew and I talked through this, I think the idea was that to be as broad as possible, to try to make the funds as flexible as they could. But really, like when we talked about that, his examples were like short-term, like a transitional shelter, or
Okay.
like an emergency shelter.
Okay.
I certainly have on our list of needs for this introduction section, just some more detail on what kinds of projects are eligible, just a little bit, maybe a few examples, and then just a little bit more context as far as how this fund came to be, and maybe some information specific to Helena on Does that sound about right?
Mhm.
Perfect.
And do we need to be picky on the must be a project's primary funding source? Should it say over 50% or define that? Or is that overthinking?
No, not at all. Where are you reading that? Are you?
Just under the introduction, the second paragraph, the last sentence. If it's not, I think it might be broken out more specifically in a later section that says you have to have at least this much from somebody else. So we could
Okay.
probably be fine with it.
Right.
I was just wondering if someone's going to come back and say, well, what's the definition of primary?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I like that. I think it's probably, and maybe Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think some of the applications might have a funding stack that has like numerous different people in there, or numerous different sources in there. And so I want to say that as far as this goes, our primary funding source is either going to be the largest or the one with the most restrictive compliance requirements attached to it. And so thinking of like home funds or some of those larger ones that are listed out there. I don't know, Michael, if you disagree, if you think there might be other sources or other, maybe that section could be expanded for clarity.
Give me the page number. Let me just open that up.
So we're on page 1, that second paragraph. I'm just thinking whether primary funding source, the very last sentence, whether primary funding source needs to be defined as like a percentage of the overall project cost. Did I get that right, Stephanie?
Page 1 of the guideline.
Okay. Yep, page 1, second paragraph, last sentence.
What I would say though is that we are showing a match requirement, of course, later in the document under, oh gosh, section 6. Oh, so it's even later, but under the match requirements, of course, it's specifying at least $5 of other financing to every $1 of HAHFT, TF, whatever. Or down to a 3-to-1 match for other non-permanent housing or single family housing matching. So we do at least specify that later in the document. I guess the question is whether we want that to be clearer further up the document.
Yeah, I don't think you want to get too much detail in the introduction.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will become the whole document.
Sure. Well, how about I'll include that in our notes here, and then we can come back to it as we maybe before we finish too. But let's go ahead and move on. This is kind of one of those slides. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on this. Mostly just wanted to say that this application, this fund, will not be open to individuals seeking a grant or a loan. We really are looking just to fund organizations or companies, so public or private, it doesn't matter, as long as they're doing an affordable housing project. So eligible activities. This is another slide kind of, I guess, similar to our introduction, where in our initial feedback session, some of our partners kind of suggested maybe a little bit more detail here, like you could maybe have a list of examples, accessory dwelling units, multifamily housing, et cetera, just to give people an idea of a little bit more detailed idea there.
You know,
okay
one thing, development of affordable single family housing And by that, you mean home ownership?
Correct.
So development would suggest that we're building would only be funding new housing. So would we, under this, is it the broadest sense of development? So say, could funds be used as part of a down payment assistance program to make the purchase of a home affordable?
You know, when they initially passed I guess it'd be a resolution to create this fund, it was that broad. So it certainly can provide money for programming like that. I'm not sure now that we've kind of whittled the guidelines down. That's a good question, Michael. I guess I need to maybe do a little, I need to have a couple conversations here maybe before I can answer that.
Yeah, I might change, because rental housing can be single family housing.
Sure.
And so I would change that second bullet to development of affordable home ownership opportunities. And that you might clarify what would be included in there. That could be the construction, renovation, or it could be subsidy. Usually affordable home ownership can be subsidized on the construction side or on the purchase side, or both. And frequently it's a little more affordable sometimes to do it as a down payment assistance kind of type program. But
while I don't disagree with what we're talking about in terms of trying to provide additional funding for actually putting that down payment down, we are immediately flying in the face of the eligible applicants that we just went through in terms of single individual home ownership. So I don't know how we'd want to, I guess.
Well, it would be done through, individuals wouldn't be applying for it. It would be an organization. Currently, say NeighborWorks Montana
Right.
offers home buyer assistance in our area.
Right. That
They
would
took
make
over.
sense.
And then it would be an additional funding source for our area that a home buyer in the community could, if NeighborWorks Montana would come in and say, ask for a certain amount of funding to have in a pool to offer to city of Helena home buyers. And it could be even built, I don't know if, I'm just using this as an example. You see it in sometimes it could be built around a certain population that you want to target, community first responders, teachers, nurses, those kind of things, or just a general home ownership. And then it could be added to the home funded home buyer assistance that the NeighborWorks Montana has. And it so that's a common source of getting affordable home ownership versus funding only the development or the renovation of existing homes, and then subsidizing just not the purchase, but the other way around. So I would just clarify that, and I would use affordable home ownership, and then you would want to clarify that you would also, whether or not you would consider, and it would need to be permanent. So things like manufactured homes on a permanent foundation, would they qualify? Certainly something that's on a permanent foundation wouldn't be permanent. So I think you get into that a little bit.
Thanks, Michael. I'll have to get back to you at least on the programming services side of that. So maybe we can back burner that portion of the discussion.
Yeah.
And I can do a follow-up email. Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no, just you're asking questions.
Mhm. So we'll move on to eligible uses. So here, this is almost I think it is pretty much verbatim from what's in our manual here. So any professional fees and hard costs, acquisition of real property and improvements, infrastructure improvements necessary to support eligible activities, permitting, plan reviews, and water and wastewater development fees, and then other activities or uses as recommended by the advisory board or and approved by the commission. And so you guys probably saw language like that kind of peppered throughout here. And I think that really just kind of hopefully gives you the flexibility when going through applications to kind of make a unique, some unique decisions, I guess, if the applicant has some needs outside of what's generally accepted here. So again, just hopefully another tool to make this fund as flexible as possible. Ineligible activities. I think a lot of these restrictions kind of align with the federal, some federal and state programs. There's no land banking. I think we might have talked about this in one of the initial meetings we had, but really we just don't want people purchasing land and then sitting on it. There needs to be some kind of plan for the immediate development or building of the property. We're not financing long-term operation or maintenance, and we're not financing administrative or operating expenses of applicant, developer, sponsor, or any other related entity. And we're not purchasing equipment, furnishings, or goods that are not permanent components of the housing. All right, now we're getting into.
Would we pay any admin fee to an entity that is, say, assisting, say, in the earlier discussion of a say down payment assistance to first-time home buyers? Usually there's an associated it's kind of an admin fee. It might be $500 a loan or something like that, since there are costs associated with an organization doing those type of transactions.
Sure. Yeah, I think it can, and I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about in the administrative and operating expense of an applicant developer is speaking more to the ongoing expenses versus, so like say on a home program funded, you're allowed a certain level of administrative expenses because just the work itself requires for doing the project. It's not just the money to pay for it, you have to pay staff to implement
Sure.
the project. But it could, I mean, the city's money, it could make clear that that administrative expenses aren't anticipated, since this is just purely gap financing, and that but I could see in certain uses it might be a disincentive for organizations getting involved if there's no cost, no eligible expense to the program for this. I think all funds are to be in a revolving loan, correct? So unlike a grant where so that might be the difference, and that people wouldn't probably want to charge off admin fees to a loan program. So
Right. Yeah, and I think I think another thing I can run that by Andrew and see if he has any thoughts on that, but yeah, I guess I'm not sure, Michael.
yeah, well, bring up the example of home buyer assistance or those type of programs.
Okay.
And then he can show you, you can look at the home program or CDBG pro formas. They include lines for project admin versus ongoing expenses for operating
Oh, okay.
the project. Yeah.
So jump into rental and non-permanent housing. So I think there we had, I think maybe the single family housing set it a max area median income of 120%, but actually lowered that to 80. So I think across the board right now, we're looking at a maximum of 80% area median income for the beneficiaries of any of this programming. And then we're not funding projects that displace or relocate current occupants, just because that triggers a lot of federal requirements that we really didn't want to have to get into. So for kind of the ease of use of this fund, we set that as a requirement. And then accessibility standards. So that's, let's see, let me get. So if you go to page 3, you can kind of see some of those listed out there. And we have here the ability to waive those standards on a case-by-case basis. So obviously that's not ideal, but some of the feedback we got initially was in the case where they might be doing a rehabilitation on an older home, it might just be cost prohibitive to add a bathroom on the first floor, or maybe depending on what else is going on in the home, it might just not be feasible to add all of those standards or bring it up to all of those standards. And does anyone have questions or concerns about that?
I think just in terms of thinking about how much accessible upgrades might need to be done to an existing property, we could stick to the existing building code suggests pretty much up to 25% of a project's funding needs to go towards accessibility upgrades, unless of course there's none left to upgrade. So I think just keeping in mind, it might not even go into these guidelines, but might be something that more or less internally we kind of stick to in terms of trying to determine where and what needs accessible upgrading. And then just as a little nitpick, under the building standards and accessibility number 7, a minimum of a ground floor level half bath with a 30 by 48 inch turn space, it reads. That isn't a turn space. It needs to be a clear floor space, to be a bit pedantic about it.
Okay. Those are do you happen to know if those dimensions are accurate? It's just the wording there. Is that what
They
you're?
are.
Okay.
The dimensions are accurate. The wording is more or less the clear floor space. The turn space would be a 60-inch circle or a T shaped of varying inches.
Okay, gotcha.
Here it says that-
What this language is from a number of years ago, the state adopted what's called a visitability standard. And so the idea is to establish a minimal level of physical accessibility in funded housing activity.
Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, it says that there was concern from housing agencies about this, about waiving those standards. Do you know what those concerns were?
Yeah, I think that was specifically from AARP, and their main focus is keeping people, or one of their focuses is keeping people in their homes, and they were worried that if we were quick to waive this kind of standard, that it might prevent people from staying in homes that they could be staying in otherwise. I think they were just worried that maybe we were, not focused on that or not having that be a goal.
I see. And that, could this set us up to run afoul of the ADA? I mean, if we waive ADA accessibility standards, could we end up running afoul?
I mean, what I would say to that, Chris, is, I mean, we're not going to get a project permitted and finished without complying to ADA. Now, again, with existing building codes, if we're talking about renovating or rehabilitating an existing building, it's a matter of just a bit of a percentage and kind of what are the most important places to update.
Okay.
And so I think in terms of at least what we're listing here, this is just a minimum requirement. I don't think, and maybe I should look at the wording of it, but us waiving those requirements won't, and I think to your concern, it won't waive those requirements for actual permitting of the project. So.
All right, thanks.
But I think it's a good point in terms of looking at, I think if you look, I think this is taken from the section from the tax credit application and from the home and CDBG applications. And I think there is an understanding, particularly on new construction and major renovation, that you have to meet the Fair Housing Act design standards. And if there's federal funding involved, it has to meet the 504 design additional standards. And what this language is here is just an additional expectation where you might be able to, because say the Fair Housing Act design standards only don't apply to units below fourplexes. So it's the idea. So like if you're building new home, single family homes, that you would be providing at least a minimum visitability, accessibility on the ground floor. And so there are certain types of housing types that this rule would say you couldn't do, like build housing, put a garage on the bottom and not have a ground floor entrance. And so the idea is to make it as usable as possible, all ages and all abilities.
Okay. Right.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the loan aspect of the rental and non-permanent housing. So these could either be short-term construction loans or longer-term permanent financing. The permanent loans would be a maximum of $400,000 with an 18-year term and at least 1% interest. And I think as far as interest goes, in each of these sections, it says that the applicant can suggest a percentage, but no less than 1%. And non-permanent housing may request a 50-50 grant loan. And I think the idea behind that is just knowing that there probably won't be the kind of return in the form of rent or there won't be as much of a return or a cash flow, I guess, for the applicant. And so I think it would be a lot more beneficial to have some portion of this end up being granted. We'll also do construction loans with a maximum of $1 million at a 3-year term and also at least 1% interest. And then again, their non-permanent housing may request a 25-75 grant loan ratio. So again, applicants can propose the terms with a 5-to-1 match, and then that non-permanent housing can also request down to a 3-to-1 match. And I put just a reference to the period of affordability. I didn't actually include that in there. Let me get there. And so I think it goes up to, if we we're going to put in 400,000 to $1 million, it would be up to a 35-year period of affordability, and then obviously down from there, depending on how much was committed through this fund.
I might suggest that in addition to the non-permanent housing loan forgiveness, that you might include other housing targeted at special needs or particularly low income populations, because you don't want to create just an incentive for kind of emergency type housing when permanent housing is preferred. So things like permanent supportive housing that's serving, formerly homeless persons with serious disabling disabilities would, they would have similar issues in terms of being able to pay. The cash flow wouldn't be the same as, say, on a tax credit property that's built for people at 60% or 80% of median.
Yep, and that's what I have in my notes here, Michael, that perhaps instead of, I guess, having those interest rates connected to the target area median income as well. I think someone had maybe suggested that.
That'd be a good way of doing it. That housing that's targeted at extremely low income, below 30%, might qualify
and have
for
that.
certain.
Right, or the proportion of grant forgiveness be also kind of determined by that percentage, AMI percentage as well. And then just some comments. Some concern has been expressed about the sustainability of this fund. So obviously, if we're giving up to a $1 million award, we have 1.9 million currently in our fund. We certainly want to use this money. We don't want to use it immediately. And so I think there's been a lot of comments on either side of this as far as if we use a substantial amount that, could be a show of how needed this is, how effective it can be, and maybe push the city and the commission to perhaps, put more of our more general fund money towards it, or really start looking at other avenues of money for this fund. So just some things to think about if you guys have thoughts on that, concerns, or maybe even down the road, if you guys have ideas for other sources of income for the fund. Certainly going to be starting to look at that pretty soon here as well.
The marijuana money.
That's what I was.
There you go.
No, Colorado, they use a lot of their Colorado cannabis tax for that purpose. And so I believe the county's tax that they're proposing putting on the ballot, the city would get a certain percentage of that, and that would be a good use of some of that.
Kara, can private individuals donate to this fund?
Absolutely. I need to do a little bit more research to figure out kind of what our processes look like there, but yeah, there's no real limit, I don't think, on private donations.
They're tax deductible.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah,
Right.
we might have some of that information now.
Yeah. So, any other comments on this section before we move on? Okay. Let's get into the single family housing. So some similar things as far as that area median income and the accessibility standards. Let's see, funds will be used as construction loans, not permanent loans. with a 3-to-1 match, and the underwriting and subsidy layering review is much more subjective for this portion. And then the final project cost must be substantially the same as application as when they applied. If not, there will just have to be a kind of an approval process by the city. And then the applicant must show an ability to ensure continued use by eligible owners for at least 35 years. And that could be through a deed restriction or I think a land trust as well. Let's see. Do you guys have any comments or additions you'd like to see here?
In general, I'm thinking about how project costs can vary wildly from project to project. And kind of one thing I'm curious about is how are we going to establish what the cutoff for requiring extra funding is? So, for example, if an applicant comes to us saying they want assistance in building an 8-unit apartment complex, what's to say, maybe we just tell them they can reduce it down to 6 units and finish with, 3/4 of their initial budget or 3/4 of their initial cost to try to get it under budget. Is that going to be, I suppose, part of the application process for projects that we're reviewing? And I suppose just that more or less thinking out loud is my curiosity for how we determine, whether or not a project can just be value engineered or if they will actually require extra funding to finish the project.
Sure. Yeah. Let me trying to find. I think there might be in. It's one of in those last sections. Trying to find. It actually might be in the application. Let me see. I might have to get back to you on that one, Riley, but let me find the exact spot where we do have some language in either the application or the guidelines about that, and I'll find that for you.
Yeah. And, like I said, just thinking out loud and something for us to be aware of when reviewing applications.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and move on to some of our administrative procedures. So just some highlights here. Again, funds don't necessarily have to be awarded. And so if we decide we have 1 million to give away this project round, if we have like 2 million total in project applications, but we're just not feeling very comfortable with maybe all of them, or maybe just one of them we feel comfortable with, we're certainly not looking to completely deplete the source, whatever we've allocated for that round. We can certainly have leftover money. And just as an example of that, Missoula did just open up their fund, I think in like maybe October, for kind of to test their guidelines out, and they released, I don't have the exact figures, but something like 300,000, and they ended up only actually awarding 30,000. So they really just combed through those applications and decided, and they had several applications that were all total much more than 300,000. But so certainly be prepared for a situation like that. Nothing has to be funded. We are looking if when we award a project for it to have progress within 8 months. So again, not looking to sit on money or sit on projects. We want to see things happening. Past poor performance will jeopardize current applications or future applications. And then we'll have an annual public comment period regarding these guidelines and the application process as well. So something kind of similar, maybe a bit of an abbreviated version of this. And I think certainly this next year or after our first application cycle will be a very important time to kind of really talk about what worked and what didn't, and actually have some experience to base that off of. So yeah, definitely none of this will be set in stone necessarily, but we certainly do want to get it as right as possible out of the gate. Any questions, comments, additions on that section?
I think just in general, sorry, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. In general, I think we could use to request for an actual project schedule if we are, anticipating anything we fund to actually progress within the 8 months. I think that is something we should ask for.
Sure.
Because I see a repayment schedule, but not necessarily what the actual project build schedule would be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, different types of projects have different timelines, and we would want to be careful not to, sometimes in putting the money together, I could see that it would be helpful to have a commitment for an application going forward to the state. So to show leverage and local community support. And though that project may end up being 18 months before it's under construction.
Right. And I would agree with you, Michael. I've definitely seen where, everybody has their ducks in a row and they can start construction next week, or, they're still trying to find funding sources and whatnot. But it's more or less, of course, just trying to establish a schedule for, this is what our plan is. This is us trying to seek the funding within 6 months, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just more or less to show the due diligence of them planning out the progressive year pretty much.
Yeah. And do we have a project timeline in the application? Kara?
Oh, we do, as far as like the application schedule, is that what you're talking about, Michael?
Well, in terms of a project schedule for someone requesting funding as to the timeline for their project, milestones and things like that.
Right. Like what does, progress within 8 months entail? Do they need to break ground within 8 months? Do they just need to apply for a permit within 8 months? Do they just need to, I suppose, show viability of funding within 8 months? I'm kind of curious how we would define that.
Yeah, and I think that was left kind of intentionally vague, just kind of for those reasons we've discussed, but that might be a good addition, or at least some guidance there.
Well, and maybe we do leave it vague, and it more or less comes down to us discussing that and whether or not we can deem something viable based off of the schedule or whatever.
Sure.
So Kara, what page number is this specific language?
Oh, I don't think we have language in there. We're looking,
Okay.
You guys are looking at the application now, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at the guidelines, and it states it on something similar underneath the administrative procedures on page 13. And it says that, let's see here, progress, demonstrable progress towards completion within 1 year of the date set, a preliminary letter commitment. About in the middle of page 13. My question on that
Okay.
is
Yeah.
defining demonstratable. Do we want that to be a demonstration of like a set of drawings? Because it can take a year on some projects to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And on a larger project, just the funding cycles are such that depending on when they make applications. So, a demonstration of progress would include, following through on making the additional applications. And the city money wouldn't be released until all the funding would be in place. So you're protected there, but you wouldn't want to be pooling a commitment, say on a tax credit project, because that cycle is almost a year in itself. But you wouldn't want to, if a project didn't say go ahead and make application as they promised in their city application, that would be a reason to withdraw the commitment. Along that lines.
Well, let's see. Other than, I guess, that, are you guys seeing anything else where you feel like maybe there needs to be some more clarity, or
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think there needs to be more clarity. It's just a matter of if there isn't clear, I think that will invite more discussion that we'll have to go through in order to establish whether or not, any schedule they may give us and or whether or not they actually make demonstrable progress, and whether or not that is what they're going towards. I think then it becomes, of course, more or less just a judgment call that this committee has to make at that point, unless we do want to define it.
Yeah, good point. All right, well, let me, I'll include that in my notes. And again, maybe run that by Andrew if he has maybe some examples he can put in there, maybe to eliminate some of that potential discussion on an application. We can go from there. So that's really all I had as far as the guidelines go. I know that certainly doesn't cover all the details in that document. So if you guys, maybe after I send out these notes, if you guys feel like there's other things that are coming to mind, or if you reread it and kind of feel like there's something missing there, please feel free to email, and I can get that included in our notes here for our edits. As far as the application goes, I didn't go through in quite the same way. Really kind of just wanted to hit the funding cycle timeline and then talk about maybe some funding priorities. And so this is kind of based on, if you're looking at the application, we have two different funding timelines in there, thinking that we'll do one that hopefully kind of will align with some of those larger programs like the home program, tax credit program, things like that. And then one later in the year that might be valuable to others, either who are maybe between cycles or otherwise. So certainly these dates aren't definite either. The city commit, like it'll have to align with the city calendar and when the commission has their meetings. But this is kind of an example. So say the funding notice goes out in early September with the due date of November 1st for the application. We'll have those applicants present to this committee or this board, and then city staff. And then the board gets to make recommendations. We'll have, looks like about 2 weeks or so to make recommendations based on the applications and the presentations. And then it looks like another couple weeks for final funding decisions. So certainly a pretty quick turnaround time here. Like Michael said, I mean, some of those, like a tax credit application might be, I don't even really know, like it sound like you said a year in the making, maybe even more.
Well, just the
So
application process starts at a certain time of year, and by the time you go through all the steps, it's about 8 months, 9 months before you know if you've been funded.
Okay. So
You
certainly
know,
wanting to have
just to
a,
our conversation about project schedule, that you might include that in the content of the application, under the application contents, a project timeline or project
Right.
schedule.
And I do find mention of an implementation schedule, but that's literally all it says. Maybe we want to just expand on that in
Yeah.
terms of like dictating funding timeline goals, or what's the word I'm looking for? Milestones, funding milestones, permitting milestones, building milestones, et cetera, et cetera. So even if, you know, to your concern, Michael, if it's going to take another year for everybody to kind of get all of their applications reviewed and whether or not they'll secure the funding, they'll at least have that in an implementation schedule that, 8 months down the line, we can check with them. Did you get the funding? Yes, then we can move forward. If not, then maybe we just pull our funding because, of course, the primary funding had fallen off at that point.
Exactly. And the thing is, one of the strengths of this funding, where I think it will be an advantage to our Helena area projects, is that to have local support, even if it's a small, relatively small to the scale of the project, may make it more competitive in being awarded those funds. And so that project's timeline schedule would be, submit, as you said, a funding application or whatever. And if they haven't done that, and there isn't good reason, then you could reconsider and pull back the funding commitment. But we would want to allow them to have, a logical. We would be able to assess in the application phase if their project schedule fits the type of project they're talking about.
Right. So I think what we're aiming towards, at least with, we should expand upon that implementation schedule. We're requesting in the application to list funding milestones and, permitting milestones and building milestones. I think we should just put those 3 items in there, at least, so we can have a better gauge of course, their intent versus, we'll build as soon as we can, which we might get from some people.
Yeah.
all right.
One thing, just care both on the guidelines and in the application itself, that if I would ask that you take a look to include home buyer assistance projects in the home ownership, because just the way it's written, you're not really allowing that use, and I think can be a very effective way of cost effectively promoting home ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not directly to an individual. It would have to be an intermediary entity, agency that would be established, that would be managing those funds and making the loans.
Yeah, I'll talk to Andrew, and I know there was some conversation we'd had initially about that, and maybe even before.
I remember talking about it at
if
housing, the housing task force.
task, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought home buyer assistance was in here. It should be.
here. So funding priorities is that next section right under the application schedule. And this is one where there really is a fair amount of flexibility for you guys to kind of like each year, each funding cycle, and certainly right now to kind of play with these items. And I know Chris had kind of reached out earlier asking kind of if there's like any thought to an environmental or sustainability goal for this funding. And so that is kind of one of their, I guess we've been thinking of the ones that are in there now as kind of placeholder ones. But certainly they will, you know, have to align with our like city housing goals or general goals and policies. But certainly read through those. If you guys, I'm not sure if anyone's had any thoughts so far on that section. Some of them I think are more, I think kind of just align with some of the stuff we've already talked about in the guidelines as far as, you know, like maximizing outside funding or leveraging partnerships. We're certainly looking to have this fund be sustainable. So I don't know, it will just open up the floor here if you guys have any comments or maybe some things that are jumping out to you.
Yeah, Kara, I think that we should be giving higher priority to stuff that addresses climate issues. I know some jurisdictions now are not allowing gas appliances in consumption because of the health and also the climate stuff. And I was looking at our building codes, which are, I think, 2018, and there are newer ones from 2021, I think, that will reduce energy costs like another 10% over the 2018 ones that the city has adopted. And I don't know, maybe we could incorporate those somehow. And that's the kind of stuff I was thinking about. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So Kara, if I might, I'm Kim Mack. I'm the chief building official, and I can help answer that one. The building codes and stuff that the city of Helena uses are adopted by the state, and then those are the codes we have to use that the city adopts. They are currently in the process of going through the adoption process of the 21 codes, and they anticipate probably by the end of February the state adopting them. And then we've got, under state law, 90 days or thereabouts between commission meetings to get it adopted into the city of Helena. Those are the minimum standards, and we certainly encourage folks, if they want to do something, higher insulation values, better windows, and all those type of things. So we are going to the 21 codes. I anticipate probably April, May at the latest that the city would have those codes adopted.
I think that's great. I think we could go beyond that as we're prioritizing who we give money to.
One thing I will say to that, and while I definitely don't disagree, I think it's obviously an important goal we all should be aiming towards. But what I'm cautious about is that we are talking about funding affordable housing, which means that these aren't exactly going to be the highest of luxury apartments. And to that end, of course, a lot of more upfront, sustainable, and environmentally friendly installations end up costing more upfront, of course, and then they save money from energy consumption down the line. Now, and this might tie back into my original concern with where do we determine whether a project is viable without our additional funding, is that, are those sustainable engineering installations, are those going to be cost effective enough for us to fund it, and or do we or can we deem that it's unnecessary, value engineer it out? So I think where I'm going is that maybe, of course, to your request, Chris, is that we could, of course, try to give some incentive towards it. But the problem of the matter is that it drives prices up of the construction almost exponentially. So that's just something we'll have to kind of balance.
Right.
But I feel like if
Lot
it
of-
saves the person money over time, that is creating more of an affordable housing. So I feel like it's a line you have to really play with.
Agreed.
Because, yeah, no, a lot of these state affordable housing programs, the tax credit application provides points for sustainable design. So, resource conservation, those type of things. And they define it, something that say provides insulation above beyond the basic requirements, or perhaps have solar or some other thing, as was stated, that it makes it affordable long term.
And I think maybe just to combine what we've been discussing about it, maybe in our application and or guidelines, we state like we will give, I don't know if I should say we should give preference to those that do buy into those tax credits, but maybe we could at least point that out, say, hey, this will most certainly help the project out in terms of funding and viability.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's public money, so I think it should be used in a way that's going to benefit the public, as far as these environmental issues are concerned. So yeah, maybe we can figure out some wording. And I do think it's a really good point that it's going to make it more affordable for the occupant down the road. Right.
Kara, I would have you look at the tax credit application, and I think Home has similar language. See how they frame those questions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, it's just something we should be encouraging. And by asking the question, if they didn't give it any thought, then hopefully we're making them think about those things. And even, I think most affordable housing is really taking steps to deal with those things because of long-term affordability.
Any of those other priorities sticking out to you, or do you feel like there's ones that maybe shouldn't be in there? And these are things too, I kind of said this, I guess, but any of this we can make edits to depending on how it is in practice. And I think this is a section where, we really can in 2023, if we decide, depending on what's happening in Helena, or, whatever the circumstances are, I think we get to play with these and make it as useful and, as possible. So maybe this is a good one to kind of back burner, and you guys are welcome to kind of think about it. And you can always kind of email me your specific priorities, or we could take that on at a later date too. Just in the interest of time, I know we're kind of getting towards the end of our meeting time here. I just want to reiterate our, well, in the future, kind of once we get a good system down, and our administrative assistant is out on maternity leave right now, so usually she would kind of help us make the meeting minutes and send those out. I'm going to give that a shot this time, and just because I think it's important to kind of get this all summarized and in writing, and again, hoping that we can have those edits made and have a document that we feel comfortable hopefully voting on during this next meeting. But again, that'll be kind of one of the first things that we go over that next meeting is accepting the minutes from this one, and hopefully doing that vote. So our next meeting will be March 2nd at 2 p.m. Is there anything you guys would like to say before we kind of close this meeting out? Any last comments or things that you'd like to have recorded? And I guess, Michael, I should probably hand this over to you too to be official.
Attorney, anything else for the good of the cause this afternoon? Again, please do send in any comments, additional thoughts you have to Kara, and she can include those in the meeting notes. So, let me see. Can you let me see? Have you sent out a? Yeah. April did send out a complete year save the date, which is good. So I think we're all good.
Okay, good.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Kara.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, guys. Hope the rest of your week goes well.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.